The blast hit before anyone in the shaft had time to shout a warning. A roar of black powder shook the timber braces, sending a wave of dust through the tunnel's northern entrance. Lanterns swung on their hooks, glass chiming as loose rock rattled down from the ceiling. Men waiting near the supply carts froze, staring into the darkness where the blasting crew had just been working. For several seconds, there was no sound at all, just drifting dust and the echo of the explosion rolling through the mile-long passage. Then came the yelling. Someone was alive down there. In the early 1800s, the plan to dig straight through Hoosac Mountain was seen as bold but necessary. A rail line linking western Massachusetts to the Hudson River promised money, trade, and prestige. But the mountain was more than 4.5 miles of unforgiving rock, and the techniques needed to cut through it were still in their infancy. Workers came from all over: Irish immigrants, Civil War veterans looking for steady work, local laborers willing to risk their lives for $1 a day. They quickly learned that the tunnel would demand everything they had. The first years were slow. Crews relied on hand drills and black powder charges, forcing progress inch by inch. Water seeped constantly from the ceiling and walls, turning the floor into a slurry of mud and debris. Ventilation was almost non-existent. After each blast, smoke from the powder drifted through the narrow spaces, burning the men's throats and choking them as they tried to clear rubble. Heat from the lamps made the air even heavier. Many workers lasted only a few days before giving up. Accidents began almost immediately. Some were predictable: falling rock, collapsing braces, misfired charges. Others were sudden, terrifying failures of equipment pushed past its limits. In 1865, as engineers began shifting from black powder to nitroglycerin, the dangers multiplied. The explosive was more powerful and allowed faster progress, but it was unstable. Temperature swings or simple mishandling could set it off without warning. Men who carried it into the tunnel moved carefully, aware that one slip could take them and everyone around them. Among the most feared parts of the project was the central shaft, a vertical pit more than 1,000 feet deep that allowed crews to work from the middle of the mountain outward. Getting into or out of the shaft meant riding a narrow hoist platform suspended by cables. The descent took several minutes, with darkness pressing closer the deeper the platform traveled. Water from above dripped constantly, turning the wooden planks slick. The sound of the pumps, struggling to keep water from flooding the shaft, echoed through the confined space. In 1867, the central shaft became the site of one of the tunnel's worst disasters. Night shift workers were inside, drilling toward the day's blast point, while above them a small engine pumped air down the shaft and powered the hoist. Without warning, a spark from a lamp ignited leaking gas near the engine house. The fire spread instantly, climbing through the hoist frame and snapping the main cables. Men inside the shaft heard the screech of metal and then the thundering crash as the burning machinery fell toward them. When rescuers tried to climb down hours later, they were driven back by thick smoke and rising heat. By morning, the entire shaft was a chimney of scorched timbers and toxic gas. It took several days before crews could reach the bottom. When they did, they found that many of the workers had survived the initial fall, but suffocated before help could reach them. Recovery teams used makeshift stretchers to carry the bodies up the long incline, their lantern light reflecting off charred beams and twisted metal. Newspapers across the state reported that the tunnel had become a death trap. Despite the loss, construction pressed on. Local officials and railroad investors refused to give up on the project, and the workers who survived the disaster returned because there were few other jobs available. The mountain claimed more lives as progress continued. In winter, freezing water formed sheets of ice inside the tunnel, making footing treacherous. In summer, heat built up until breathing felt like inhaling steam. Gases trapped in pockets of rock would sometimes seep into newly blasted cavities, filling the air with invisible dangers. When men lit fuses for the next round of charges, they had no way of knowing whether they were standing in a mixture that could ignite. In one incident, a group of drillers working the east end of the tunnel struck a pocket of gas while preparing a series of small charges. They retreated to what they thought was a safe distance. Moments later, the gas ignited, sending a fireball coursing down the length of the bore. The blast knocked lanterns from the walls and hurled men onto the rails that carried ore carts. Survivors staggered out with their faces burned and clothing still smoldering, unable to speak through scorched throats. Several later died from their injuries. The deeper the crews went, the worse the ventilation became. Engineers tried building a series of fans and ducts to push fresh air through the tunnel, but the system was unreliable. On calm days, smoke from the blasts hung in the air long after the debris had been cleared, forcing men to work half-blind as they chipped away at the rock. Some collapsed from carbon monoxide poisoning without realizing they were in danger. Others developed chronic lung conditions that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. By the early 1870s, the tunnel's grim reputation was widely known. Locals called it the Bloody Pit, a place where men vanished into the mountain and never returned. Wives waited at home for news that their husbands had survived each shift. Children walked to the site to watch the smoke rising from the entrances, hoping their fathers were among those climbing out at the end of the day. When the whistle sounded at odd hours, signaling another accident, families rushed to the edge of the mountain road to see who would be carried down on stretchers. Still, progress slowly continued. Workers advanced from both ends and from the central shaft, using new drilling machines that could bite deeper and faster into the rock. But the machines, like everything else in the tunnel, came with risks. In 1873, a steam-powered drill malfunctioned during a routine shift, sending shrapnel flying across the work area. The blast struck several men before anyone could shut off the power. They were loaded into wagons and rushed toward the nearest town, but some died before the doctor could reach them. After nearly 20 years of labor, the final breakthrough finally came. Crews from the east and west ends of the tunnel met in the center with only a few inches of misalignment, a remarkable achievement given the era's technology. But the celebration was subdued. Everyone on the project knew how many workers had died to make the connection possible. The official count hovered around 200, though many believed the real number was higher due to poor record-keeping and men who simply disappeared from the payroll. When the first trains passed through the completed tunnel, the smoke from their engines settled into the same spaces where so many workers had once struggled. Locals lined the hillside to watch the locomotive emerge from the far end, but the cheers were brief. The tunnel had delivered on its promise, yet the cost lingered in every family that had lost someone inside the mountain. Even after operations stabilized, stories circulated of strange sounds echoing in the tunnels at night. Footsteps, shouts, the distant ringing of metal on stone. They weren't supernatural tales so much as memories, kept alive by the men who had seen how hard the mountain fought back. Today, the Hoosac Tunnel stands as one of the most grueling engineering projects in American history. It was built at a time when safety standards were almost non-existent and risk was accepted as part of the job. The people who dug through that mountain left behind more than a railroad passage. They left thousands of feet of rock marked by fire, sweat, and sacrifice, carved out one dangerous shift at a time. Thank you for listening to Road to Ruins. Subscribe for more true stories where systems fail and people pay the price.